Welcome to Creative Courage Chats, a search for a new understanding of creativity and problem solving. I'm Alex Raffy. Hi, everybody. We're back to another Creative Courage Chat. I'm on vacation while we're doing this. I scheduled this on my vacation. we had to reschedule, I think, a couple times, and I was like, I don't care. We'll sit down for a half hour or so and just chat about creativity. I'm here with Preston. He's a photographer. He's a creative, another creative, and as we like to talk to creatives. I'm wearing my Uruguay hat because my family's from Uruguay, and I'm a big soccer fan, and they're playing a qualifying game today, so it's good luck. I wear this every time they play, so it's good luck. But anyway,
you get a call if they lose. If you're not wearing it, they lose. You get a call, right?
No, they're not going to lose.
Because you have the hat on.
That's right. That's how it works.
Right, got it.
That's why I wear it. So, Greg, we met just through discussions, through other people that I've interviewed and stuff like that. We kind of had the connection made. So, why don't you go ahead and give it a little bit of introduction, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, I'm born and raised in Las Vegas. Grew up, went to high school out here. Thought through high school and college that I was going to be a comic book artist, and worked at it and was never very good. But as I was going along, so I went to UNLV for 2 years, and was lucky to have a teacher named Rita Abbey, who was brilliant, still is brilliant. She's lives here in town, and after about 2 years as one of her students, she pulls me aside and she goes, "You need to go to a better school." And I was like, "What?" And she goes, "You want to be a commercial guy, and this is not a commercial school. You need to go someplace that's going to feed you." And so I left UNLV and went to the community college and out here, and started taking drawing classes out there and illustration classes. And I made the mistake of taking a photography class in order to take reference shots for my illustrations, and absolutely fell in love with it. So I did 2 years at community college with the out there at the time was a guy named Jim Palmer. He was fabulous and still a good friend, and graduated with a degree in photography out there. And then I had to go to Art Center in Pasadena and study photography, and did that, and graduated a few years later. While at school, the girl that had the locker across from mine at school, I met her on the third day, and eventually we started dating. She was seeing someone else, and eventually I got her attention and got her to go out with me, and she was a semester ahead and also a photographer, and we hit it off. And so after we graduated, we literally graduated on a Friday, or I graduated on a Friday. She'd graduated a semester before, and then we got married on that Saturday, and the
rest is history.
Started our lives.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's really funny just hearing you talk about that, because I often say that you can learn a lot from a person by what they have around them in their workspace. And I see behind you, you have a lot of trinkets and like some Star Wars and some superhero stuff. And it's kind of falls into the whole comic book thing. It's kind of neat.
It does. And so the whole comic book thing, I started reading comics when I was 13 and started collecting pretty much right away. And then continued collecting up until I went to Art Center when I didn't have any money and I didn't collect. But after I got out, continued collecting, and I now have a pretty huge collection of stuff. But it kind of directed me in my hobby, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, which is photographing artists. So went to Art Center, studied commercial photography, got out, graduated, started assisting in LA for photographers. And after about 2 years in LA, my wife, now wife Sharon, she was a staff photographer for Southern California Edison, which was the biggest power conglomerate in the world. And
Mhm.
uh, one day she goes, I hate living here. And I was like, got it. And so we started looking at markets to move to open a studio. And we did a lot of research. And I said, you know, Vegas. And I kept in touch with everybody from here. And I would talk to people pretty frequently. Before I went to Art Center, I had worked in an art supply store here in town where all of the creatives bought their stuff. And it was called Desert Decor at the time. And this is pre, and so I knew all the art directors because they would come in and buy stuff, you know, their Letraset pack and their all the different rub-on lettering and layout stuff and desks. And so when I got accepted to Art Center, I let everybody know, and everybody's like, well, call us if you ever come back, you know? And so literally we made a decision that we would move back to Vegas, and it was right at the exact same time that the Mirage was coming out of the ground. And which was at the time in Las Vegas, just a huge thing. It was, everybody was so excited. And so I decided I would move back and Sharon would stay in LA and finance it. And we moved me back, and we literally opened a studio with nothing to sit on. I mean, we had our camera gear and we had one red stool, and opened the doors. And and I bought a set of sawhorses and a Luan shoot on and doors. And we had a 800 square foot space. And over the next couple years, well, over the next 10 months, Sharon gave me 10 months to get it together because she was quitting her job. You have 10 months to do this, and then I'm moving out there. I was like, okay. So the first thing I did, I knew at the time the creative director at R&R Advertising was a guy named Greg Chikowski. And he was one of the guys who, when I said I was going to go to Art Center, he was one of the guys who said, if you ever come back, call me. So first thing I did on day one was called Greg Chikowski. And I said, I don't know if you remember me. And he said, of course. And he said, come and show your portfolio. And so 3 days later, I was in R&R showing my portfolio to the whole creative department. And 3 days later, I was shooting for him.
That's great.
And yeah, it was amazing. And that's how our career went. I mean, we never did not have a job. You know, so I went around every day that I wasn't shooting, I was calling people on the phone, that's what you did back then because there was no computers. And I would just cold call and I'd say, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I know you from Desert Decor. And I would call. And so the second call I made was to a company at the time was called DDGM, which was a big ad agency here in town, and eventually became DRGM, and eventually became Dunn Reber Glenn Mars, whatever. And and the person I went in to speak to there was an ex-football player named David Hum. And David had been a quarterback for the Raiders, but he was retired and now he worked in advertising. And it turned out that we grew up on the same street here in Las Vegas. And so I went and saw him, and he was like, yeah, well, I've got a job for you. And it turned out to be photographing the winners of Megabucks.
Oh, okay.
And yeah. And the deal was, and this was right when Megabucks started, and the deal was, when I call you, no matter what time it is, you have to come out and take a portrait of the winner. And I was like, that's great. And so literally 2 a.m, you'd get a call and it's like, can you come out? And I'm like, of course. And I'd go out and photograph the winners. And we did the first 15 winners of Megabucks. That was one of the jobs. And it was always amazing. And you go, what did you learn? Well, I learned that when you play Megabucks, if you play more than $20, you're foolish because everybody in that group won in the first $20. Every single one of them. And so that was like our joke.
That's an odd statistic.
It is. But true. Actually, yeah. That's not true. There was one guy who had been playing for about 2 hours. But other than that, every single person won almost instantly when they walked up to the machine. And so that was one of our jobs. And we just started working. And within 10 months, we were successful enough for Sharon to quit her job and come on out. And meanwhile, over that period of time, every time so I would go see her every other weekend, and every other weekend she'd come out and visit me. And every time she came out, she'd stop at IKEA and bring something. So one day she brought a desk, then we had a place for the phone to sit. And one day she brought a sofa, then we had a place for clients to sit, and we built that's how we
That's
built
how
the
you do
business,
it.
literally from nothing.
Interesting.
And it was so much fun. And every day was new. And we just kind of hit it just at the exact right time. It was so much fun and so creative. And we got to be friends with all the creatives in town. And we're working constantly.
It's an interesting town with an interesting history and interesting people, that's for sure.
Right.
So, it's funny because while you're telling that story, I like thinking and explaining things in metaphor most of the time.
Yeah.
And all I could picture is a lightning bolt. You ever take a picture of a lightning bolt in your photography?
Yeah.
And for me, the path in your career doesn't look like a straight line. It looks like a freaking lightning bolt. it goes in all over directions. It splits and it breaks up and it goes everywhere. And there's other options and there's other directions it goes in. And I think careers, a lot of times especially with people that are thinking of starting a career,
right,
they have this image of what they imagine it should be like. And so they follow all these rules that they think will lead them there. When in fact, what you should do is what it sounds like you did, is
right.
You just went for opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, no matter where it took you.
Correct.
Even being called at 2 a.m. and heading in and just doing whatever you had to do. And in nowhere in your story did you complain about that.
No.
I think that's what got you more work, is that you were a photographer who didn't complain. You probably just showed up, did the shoot, smiled, and left.
Right. And we were glad to do it. And it was
right.
And it was like that. I mean, it was, it continued and continued. And it was kind of funny because after a couple of years, we would say, well, we're going to take next week off and take a vacation. And people would go, what are you talking about? You can't take a vacation. And we were that busy. Yeah. And it was wonderful and exciting. And we never turned away a job. I mean, it was just something like that,
So there you go. So you're clearly, I have a feeling that a big reason for your success is your good nature and your attitude towards things. Because the fact that your clients are telling you can't take a vacation, you're like, it was great.
yeah.
That's
great. We look back on it and, eventually we did, so we got here, we literally opened our studio on April 1st, 1988. And it just seems so appropriate to open on April Fool's Day because opening a business is dangerous anyway, and never looked back. I mean, it was just like, 2 years later, we had our first kid. 3 years later after that, we had our second kid. They grew up in the studio, I mean, it was just like, and it was fun. I would bring them on go-sees with me, and everybody go, oh, it's Ben, oh, it's Chris. So, yeah.
So the topic we talk here is creativity, and clearly you have probably a lot to offer on the topic. One of the things that just because we don't know each other very well, so what I do, I've been in I'm always creating something. I built an animatronic Halloween display in front of my house. I painted. I've made paintings. I write stories. I write poetry. I've made films. I've done I've done everything that I can do, except. I used to be in a band. It was a punk band, but it still counts. Sure. But I've done all sorts.
Was that here in Vegas?
No, it was in California. But but nothing you'd ever hear about. It's just okay. I'm a general specialist. I've done a lot of different things. I mean, the only thing I don't do is dance. I just can't do it.
One of my early jobs before I was a photographer, I had a camera and I would go around and shoot rock bands in Las Vegas.
Oh, that's cool.
It was all the local guys. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, I mean, I get together with some architects every once in a while, and a photographer that actually we get together and we play, but once a month.
Right on.
But yeah, so I'm always driven to create something. Like if I'm not creating something, a lot of times I kind of feel myself dying.
Yeah, I'm doing that now. No.
Yeah. When you're not working on something, or when you're not kind of like, I have a hard time sitting down and just watching TV sometimes, or even watching a movie. I'm like, because the movie gives me an idea, something I want to do. and I want to leave and do it, but I can't because I'm with somebody or my wife or whatever. But it happens all the time where you get distracted. And is that what it feels like for you? I mean, are you always kind of feeling like that? Like you have to be doing something?
Constantly. And so when I graduated Art Center, one of the things that there was a teacher there, Gina Antonelli, and Gina said when we were getting ready to graduate, you guys should have a personal project. I'm just going to tell you that now. And it was a nice piece of advice. And because you're going to need it. And I didn't understand it at the time, but almost right away. So I decided, okay, I'm going to photograph authors. I'm going to go out and do portraits of authors, not having any idea what I was going to do. In LA, there were always signings, there were always books. And so there was an author named William Gibson, and William was kind of the founder of the cyberpunk movement in science fiction. And he was doing a signing in LA. And I thought, well, I'm going to go photograph him. I had no idea. But I found out where the bookstore was, and I went the day ahead of time, and I talked to the owner. And it was a pretty famous bookstore. It was called Dangerous Visions. It was down in the valley. And I said, listen, would you mind if I came in and did a portrait of William Gibson while he's doing a signing? And I don't think they had any idea. And I didn't really have any idea what I was going to do. And so I went in, and a friend of mine helped me, and we set up a backdrop just very quick where he would be sitting, set up one light, and I did a portrait of him. And it took about a half hour. And I thought that was so much fun. And so I did that a few times and started making contacts with people into that area. And eventually I was doing science fiction portraits. And I pretty much everybody that you could imagine in that business or in that genre in LA that I could get a hold of. And what happened is I would go down. About a year later, we ended up moving back to Vegas. It was that's when we made the move. But I would drive down on the weekend when there was a book signing, and I'd go do a portrait. And I would stay with a friend of mine who was a cartoonist and a comic book artist and an animator. And he worked for a pretty major ad agency in LA, and I can't think of the name of it, but he was in charge of the Flintstone cereal commercials. And yeah, the animation. He was the animator or the director of the Flintstone cereal. His name's Scott Shaw. And I would go stay at Scott's house. And when I was down there, and he would see what I was doing. And one day he was like, you know what you should be doing is portraits of comic book artists and cartoonists and animators. And I was like, I don't know any of those guys. And he goes, I'll introduce you. And so we talked about it for a while. And finally, when I was doing my author, I had ended up somehow meeting the science fiction artist Mobius. And Mobius was the creative director on Willow. And he also was the creative director on the original Tron. And he was in heavy metal, and he was from France, but he was living in Santa Monica. And I ended up getting to do a series of portraits of him for a magazine article. And so having that in hand, Scott goes, you should be photographing comic book artists. And so finally, in 92, I made the drive down there, and he took me out, and we did 3 portraits. And the first one was a cartoonist named Rick DiTore, and Rick does a strip called One Big Happy. And then the second one was a guy named Sergio Aragones, who was with Mad Magazine and very famous.
Oh,
and
yes.
The third one was a guy named Jack Kirby, who invented the whole Marvel universe. And so I had these 3 portraits, and the portrait of Mobius on the beach, and it was on. And so every 3 months or so after that, I would travel down to LA, and I'd stay with Scott, and I would line up 4 or 5 portraits of cartoonists and comic book artists, and just to be around them, And it took me a while. It took me the first book, so everybody's like, what are you doing with these? I'm like, I have no idea, but it's so much fun. And I ended up getting to photograph just all of my heroes,
Yeah.
and in comics and in animation. And I got to photograph Chuck Jones, who
Wow. Yeah.
invented the Coyote and the Roadrunner. And
Sure. Yeah.
I got to do a portrait of Carl Barks, who invented Huey, Dewey, and Louie. And
If people that are watching this don't know his references, you need to look them all up because they're fantastic references. Even if you, especially if you're an animator, look up Heavy Metal. That movie is ridiculously important movie that was out there in animation.
And so living in Las Vegas, but for 15 years, I would go down and take portraits. And then as we kind of were running a little shy of people in LA, me and my buddy Lynn Peterson would fly someplace to take portraits. And Lynn, for those of you who are into comics in Las Vegas, you all know this name because Lynn owned Page After Page Comics. And he was my best friend, and he would go with me on these shoots, and he would carry my lights, and we would go photograph amazing people. Will Eisner, we went to New York and tried, in like 7 days, did like 20 portraits. It was crazy, but just tons.
So what is the thing that created the chain reaction that you seem to have had with people that were connected in the industry that were actually effectively doing great things? What is it that created those connections? Is it, as a working creative, which is really important because most people don't know how to create a career doing
and I couldn't tell you how.
But that's what I'm curious about is like, even though because it's not, because I think it's never intended thing the thing that causes people to really like you is never something you actively are trying to do. It's usually something natural that comes out of you. Do you have any idea what it is that you do? Is it that you're showing while you're like your process of shooting, where you put the subject in such a place that they were so comfortable that they might say, who you should shoot also is my friend over here.
Yes. And that's the way the whole book went. That's the way 150 portraits went, was this is great. Have you shot so-and-so? Here's their number.
Right. Because they had such a good experience. They thought, hey, he'd be great for so-and-so.
And that's what my friend Scott, who started this, he says that he's like, you're like the nicest guy. And cause I'm always, these are the nice people. And he goes, Greg, they're nice to you because you don't want anything from them.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I don't know, but it's just.
But I think it's all relative though, right? I mean, your creativity in the photograph, the thing that you visualize to make it something special and rich that's for the subject.
Right.
That energy is also applied to the method in which you create it, in your relationships, in the way that you communicate with people. The same, for lack of a better term, the kindness that you're showing to them that makes them feel comfortable is also applied to the work. And it becomes kind of something that is natural. See, what I'm doing is I don't mean to deconstruct your process, but I think
I get it.
It's important, I think, to say these things out loud sometimes, even though it might be obvious to you, is that that's something that is so incredibly relevant to be a professional creative, is to realize that you're always pitching. You're never not pitching.
It's true.
But not act like you're pitching,
Right.
Enjoy and love what you do. And then people actively do it. And then people will respond in turn, right?
It seems to be, and that's how it's gone the whole way. And then, after 15 years, people who I met along the way, one of them was a guy named Dave Scroggie, and Dave worked for a publisher named Dark Horse. And out of the blue one day, he gives me a call and he goes,
just a publisher named Dark Horse.
Yeah, a publisher named Dark Horse. And he goes, what are you doing with all those pictures, Greg? And I was like, well, I'd like to have a book. And he goes, come talk to me at Comic-Con. We'd like to publish your book. Just like that. And so I did, and went to Comic-Con and met with Mike Richardson, who was the head of Dark Horse. And he's literally like 7 foot tall. I mean, he's this big guy and very friendly, nice big smile. And he reaches out his hand. He goes, is this the photographer? Dave goes, yes, it is. He says, good, we're publishing your book. And he wanted to shake hands. And I remember I pulled my head back and I go, well, wait a minute. We should have a conversation because I want stuff. And he goes, what do you want? I said, well, I want a big book. And he goes, how big? I said, like 12 by 12. He goes, that's fine. And I said, duotone. And he goes, you can have anything you want. He says,
Duotone.
we're publishing your book. And I was like, done.
That's
And so
great.
that's how it went. Yeah. And it was just, and Dave was a contact through my friend Lynn Peterson here in town. And it was always like that. I met Dave Stevens through Lynn Peterson, and I met Scott Shaw through Lynn Peterson. So it was
Right.
that's how it was, always word of mouth. It was never something that was completely put together. It was always very friendly. So
Well, I was asked to speak one time at a creative workshop in Comic-Con, and I
oh,
remember,
right on.
yeah, so I was on a panel, and I wrote a book, and I've written a book on creativity, and
Yep.
and I was a cartoonist for a while at UNLV actually, and I did some stuff like that.
Wait a minute, I was a cartoonist at UNLV.
Oh, were you really?
I really was.
Yeah. I did a comic strip called Land of Naught, for a while over there. That was fun, and
Awesome.
yeah, so it was great. So I had a couple of them that showed up on the Channel 13 news and everything, because like
Wow.
one of the ones I did was great because two of the athletes were caught doing drugs, and so I had a basketball player and a football player on a couch, and one of them was passing a pipe to the other one, and it said, "The only bowl UNLV will see this year." And that got on the news, so that was great. But and a couple other ones. But anyway,
That is so cool.
yeah. But what I remember when I was at Comic-Con, it was very interesting because I was there with a comic book artist, and then two fiction book writers, and then it was me.
Yeah.
And I was like a working creative director for a marketing firm who's loves comics and is involved in painting and art and all this kind of stuff. But I was a working creative.
Yeah.
And then we started going through, what does creative, I mean, it's creativity mean to you? And it's like such a big topic for me. I could talk for days about it, but it came to me because the first person was talking about how you have to follow your heart and your emotional and your heart. And it was all very emotional, and they were going through, and then it came to me, and I was like, well, I'm not that romantic about it. I think all that stuff is great, but I think it's just nonsense because because I got deadlines. I don't have time to wait for inspiration. I'm there and I have to create now.
Right.
It's one of these things. So
It's your business.
right. And I started talking about the methods that I have in trying to go take the short route to where the great stuff is.
Right.
I understand my process. And I started discussing my own personal process on what I do and how I do it and how I define it.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because afterwards, the crowd walks up and starts talking to the individuals. I had the biggest crowd of people because people were like, I want to talk to you because that's all that other stuff. I don't really care about the emotion. I want to know how to freaking get work.
Right.
And how to make and it was a very interesting thing. And that's one of the things that inspired me to talk to professional creatives, to people, because people think of creativity as this magical thing, like it comes from on high.
Right.
And it falls in your lap, and it so doesn't. It comes from you, and it comes from hard work, it comes from blood, sweat, and tears. It comes from a love of what you do and a willingness to do what needs to be done to make things happen.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And working on that project, I was in the studio of Joe Kubert, and Joe had the school the comic book art school in New Jersey. And I had set up to go photograph him, and I was in his office, and in his office is comic art all over the walls, original comic art. And there's toys. And I go, oh, you're a collector. And he looked at me, he goes, I'm not a collector. People give me this stuff. He goes, Greg, this is my job. This is how I feed my family. And I was like, right. This is it. And that's what you're talking about as well.
Right.
Is everybody's like, how is this magic happen? It's just like, because if I don't, we starve.
Exactly.
That's right.
There is work. It is not easy,
No.
I have had situations. I do branding and stuff through my work, and
sure.
And it's funny because in marketing, a lot of times it's you paid by the hour, and it's interesting to me because it's kind of like the reason I'm able to create this particular logo within the short amount of time is because of my experience. If I actually billed you how much time it took me to get to this logo, I wouldn't make any money. So
it's $40,000.
Right. So it's one of those things that it's kind of like I've been able to come up and nail a logo within 20 minutes. after
Wow.
having a meeting with a person, because I know exactly what they want, because you can hear it, and then you
Sure,
do the
sure.
design and you show it to them and they're like, that's it.
And
It's
it's
funny how
like, it's like magic. It's
right.
like magic to
Yeah.
them.
And it shrinks, the time gets shrunk because you know what to ask and you know what to look for and what to
Yeah.
hear
Yeah.
and how to imagine it and everything. And
Right.
that's a powerful thing. So when you're actually, this it's intriguing to me, you're choosing groups of people that are within a creative world, which is like comic books or whatever, and you're choosing to photograph them.
Right.
Now, what is I'm wondering what your inspiration is for because you're not just saying, okay, stand right there and shooting them, right? I mean,
No, I go to their studio.
okay,
I go,
okay,
and it's always in their studio. And I want it to be as natural as possible, but I don't want it to look posed. And that's a hard thing because you're going into a space you've never seen before, and you walk in and you look around, you go, and I've told these people, please don't clean up your studio. Okay. So I go in and I do the portrait and I sit him down. Oh, here's your desk. And I want a wide angle view because I want to see what's around him. And I set him down and then I'll say, here, come stand over here. Look out the window, whatever. And depending on what the situation is. And we do the shot. And then later I'm showing the shot to someone else and they're going, oh, he cleaned up his studio. I'm like, I asked him not to clean his studio.
That's funny.
And so, but seriously, so that's my hobby. What we're talking about, this is my hobby. What I do in Las Vegas, I just wanted to say this because I know time is short probably, is I photograph casinos. I do casino work, I do architectural and portraits and food. And I love it. And then for fun, I photograph comic book artists. Okay, I want to say that.
Well, yeah. All aspects of it. I mean, you got to do, like you said, you got to actually pay the bills and do that kind of stuff. And the fact that you do casinos is very relevant because they're odd.
They're different from anything else in photography.
Right.
There's no place like that, And so that has been, that's been the funnest thing to do. I mean, it's just, you go out, you're always shooting in the middle of the night. You're always bringing a whole crew in, you're bringing lots of light because they're dank, dark places. And it's just, creative problem solving constantly.
There's a video of Bradford Salomon, who's an artist in California, a painter in California. There's a real long, weird, crazy story about him that I interviewed him for this. And he then, after our interview, had said, I want you to come in, I want to do your portrait. So he did my portrait.
Yeah.
And then we videotaped it, the process. And it was like a time-lapse thing. It was a very interesting video because it's like, because I didn't realize, well, I knew I talked too much, but I didn't realize how much I talk until I watched the video because I nonstop talk to him the whole time he's doing my portrait. And somehow he was able to paint it. I'm going to send you the video of that because it's just a weird thing.
Oh yeah, I'd love to see it.
Because you're into the processes and you get to see the how and everything. But who knows? Maybe one day he'll be your subject. Maybe you'll ask him to do a photograph. But he's a fantastic painter. He did my portrait. It's a really cool thing. I got it in my house and everything. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I'll send that over to you because it's cool because I created the video for that. But anyway, so I think that's crazy interesting that, especially because you're kind of, you got like the subjects of a lot of your work sound like they're just people that are just crazy cool,
Yeah, I feel that way.
Yeah, especially for a big nerd like me who's into all that stuff, comic books. I was like so into comic books as a kid and so many, but I do think that it's interesting also that that for people going forward and trying to find their path, their way.
Yeah.
They're always trying to emulate someone else. They're always trying to emulate the path of someone that inspired them in some way. Do you have inspirations and of people that kind of led you in a certain direction? Or was it always just your want to just do it?
Right. It's no, of course, right. In photography, like, and I, go back to Richard Avedon and Ansel Adams, those guys, and completely different work. Albert Watson, Andrew Eccles in photography, and then in comics, Neil Adams was my favorite. Jack Kirby, getting to meet Jack Kirby and hang out with him was unbelievable. Frazetta, unbelievable talent, and so I don't know if you can see behind me, but there's so many books and stuff. I'm inspired by all of it. I know that sounds really weird. It's like, Greg, nail it down.
No,
it's hard. It's hard to nail down because being visual, I'll see something. It's like that's now what I'm going to do, or that's what I'm going to emulate, or that's who I love. And it's fickle.
It's amazing though right now, because you and I are probably close, maybe the same age, I'm not sure. But back before the internet, which is crystal clear to me because it wasn't that long ago, seems like. But back before the internet, we were inspired by things. And so when we were inspired, if you were like, I'm sure you're kind of like me, you would do research on the thing you're inspired by. And then I would always go down the chain, because if I found somebody that inspired me, like whether it's poetry or whatever it was, or painting or whatever it was, I would do enough research where you'd see who inspired them. And then those people, you'd learn their work. And then you'd go like, okay, here's a new thing. And then who inspired them? And then you'd go back. And it's funny because whenever I talk to young people and I talk about their creative process and I find a musician, my advice to them is like, who's your favorite artist? And they'll tell me, and it's somebody I've never heard of. And I'll say, why don't you see who inspired them? And that's likely somebody I've heard of. And then they'll say, I'll say, then when you figure that out, go down the chain, and eventually you get to Robert Johnson, no matter what.
No, that right?
Eventually, obviously, but basically, I think that's kind of something that's a really important process for people to go through, is to learn who inspires the person that inspires you. And a big thing that bothers me is that right now, people are always so inspired because there's so much data and so much information, but they're not using it right. It's like if I get inspired by something, it's not like, oh, that inspired me, I'm going to share it with the world, this thing that this person did that inspired me.
Right.
That's fine, but what are you doing with the inspiration? It's like you're feeling a thing, and for some reason, the sharing of it is almost the what they needed to get over. Like they almost, it's almost as good as them creating something of their own,
sharing someone else's.
Right. And to me, it's kind of like we're missing all these great opportunities from people that if you're, sure, share that quote, but what are you doing with it? What do you do? Right. Write your own quote. I mean, or where are you going, or what are you doing? That's the part that's missing. It's like a missing link to me.
Yeah.
And it's for me, I kind of see it as a problem, because like, imagine if when we were young, we were bombarded with this much data and great stuff out there.
Right.
And I would eat it like, so I would eat it for lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'd just be consuming. I remember if I saw a movie, I think it's called Pirates. It was a movie called Pirates, about pirates. And I was like, I need to know everything about pirates. And I went to the library for like 3 days and I did all this research on pirates. Tons of research. And I just
drew pirates, and then was a pirate.
Yeah, I drew pirates. I was into it, and I made a board game. It was like ridiculous. Yeah. But now it's like, oh, that's cool, and then they move on to the other thing to get inspired by, and they go, oh, that's great, and then move on to the next thing. Do something with it, Right. I don't know.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm sounding like an old man right now, complaining.
No, we're both right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So it sounds like you've taught. I've taught.
Mm-hmm.
I taught at the community college for 6 years, and then taught photography at Art Institute for close to 10 years. And we would always go back to that, and people would, same exact thing. And I know just what you're talking about, where they go, hey, look at this guy's stuff. And it was like, oh, that is cool. What are you doing with it? And well, what do you mean what I'm doing with it? Same thing, It's just like, well, are you emulating this? Are you doing something like the next step? And they would be confused. Right. They wouldn't know exactly what to say after that, and I'd say, well, let's talk about this a little bit. What is about it that you like? Let's move you in that direction, kind of thing. So
And not everything is on the internet. You know,
Right.
Jerry Wayne Downs, I think is the name of a comic book artist who did westerns, comic books, and he was a fine artist who eventually did fine art. And
Yeah.
my dad owned a frame shop, and that's what I was inspired by a lot of the artwork that would come in to be framed. I would look at the
You
paintings,
bet.
and it would be
Right.
framed. My dad would make these gilded frames for museums and for galleries. And I saw one of his, and it was like this huge thing, and it was just beautiful painting, and I totally loved it. And we were invited to the opening of one of his shows, and I went to it.
Yeah.
And during one of the shows, I got to tell you, I'm not sure because I was young. I was about 12, 13 years old, I think. And there was a giant painting. I don't know if it was his. It
Okay.
was a giant painting. It was huge. But I remember it was of a old-fashioned Western classroom, like old wooden classroom, the wooden desks, and floating in the center was an astronaut in the room. And the detail was so. I saw the nails in the floorboards in the painting.
Yeah.
It was so detailed and beautiful, and I couldn't get out. I stared at that painting almost the entire time, and I was so mesmerized. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know
That's
anything about it.
incredible.
But it was an astronaut just literally floating, like he was like there was zero gravity, but he was sitting in a old schoolroom
In the future.
in the future. And I've been searching for that painting, the original, for since then everywhere, and I couldn't find it. And this year, like a few months ago, I said, "Screw it, man! I just painted my own version."
Oh,
and,
wow.
and instead of the schoolroom, my wife is an amateur photographer, and
Okay.
she loves taking pictures of old buildings. So
Yeah.
one of her pictures of an old room that she took through the window of a ghost town we took, I used that as my reference point, and then I just threw in an astronaut in the
Well,
middle.
that is so cool.
So I just made my own. I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna make
Yeah.
my own. But that's kind of what
I
we're talking
love
about.
that.
Just I'll send you the picture just because you can see.
I'd love to see it. Yeah.
But you know, and it was like, oh, this weight off my shoulders is gone now. Now the painting's in my
Catharsis.
house,
Yeah.
and it's nothing close to as good as the one I saw. I mean, in my memory, that was one of the most beautiful paintings I've ever seen.
And
in
you
my
don't
life.
remember the artist's name or?
No, because it wasn't a thing back when I was a kid. It was you don't check. You didn't.
Right. No.
It's like
of course.
wow. But it stuck with me and it never left my mind. And it was this
Wow.
image. There's certain, imagery. There's certain
Of
imagery.
course.
Like I have an ongoing illustration that I do, and I've done like 30 versions of it, just with cartoons, comic strip style and painting of
Yeah.
a machine that looks like it's growing up out of the ground, and it's got all these mechanical parts and tubing and containers, and it all works its way over to like an arc to a little eyedropper, and it drops a little drop of water on a flower, and it's always and it's like it's sucking all the stuff and it's turning it into just this little drop of water on a flower. And it for some reason that imagery
Yeah.
is very, it can't get out of my head. So it's like when I always go back to it, and every year I do a new version of this one image.
Do you know
And
the work of Ron Cobb?
yeah, I think I'm familiar with the name.
So Ron started out as a cartoonist, a political cartoonist, and became the guy who did all the drawings for the background of he was like the concept designer for Alien, and he was the concept designer for Conan.
Okay.
But before that, look up Ron Cobb. Anyway, I don't mean to change the subject.
No, that's fine.
You'll see that kind of work.
Yeah, it's kind of the mechanical stuff.
So,
the David Lynch is very much into that
me-
kind of stuff too. It's just very
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I love
that's
that. I love that stuff. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that look, and I'm very much into the lowbrow style of artwork too. I love that.
Sure.
Which you probably, because that's a lot mostly cartoonists that eventually, if they go into the fine art section, I think that's what Ren and Stimpy and like SpongeBob, they all came from that world. You know, that strange.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So we could probably. I have a feeling we could probably talk for hours and hours, but. But I kind of have to wrap it up. So I'm going to leave this. I'm going to end it with asking you, if you were to give your younger self some advice, what would it be? Like looking back at your younger self when you were just starting out, looking around, being curious, what would you say to yourself?
Take more time. Take your time. I think about that. That's funny that you asked that, because I think about that a lot. It's like, I remember younger self always being in such a hurry to get things done and trying to move on. And I have a lot of regrets, not regrets in the sense that it's horrible, but I wish I would have taken more time on this, or I wish I would have spent more time with that. And realize that there's plenty of time to do good work. It's not like if you don't do it today. And I see that in students now. It's just they're in such a hurry to move on. And I wish I could say, you know what? You have time. Take your time. Slow it down, do it right. You'll never regret it. And I think that would be me telling my younger self, take your time, be persistent by all means, but not be patient with yourself, but that's all I can come up with. Take your time.
Yeah.
And
just really kind
of in such a rush.
Yeah. Be patient and experience your process.
That's it.
Yeah, because all of our processes are so different, and most of us don't know what it is. We just do it without an awareness of what it is.
Yes.
Yeah, that I talk about that in my book about moments of discovery, the one I wrote, and because I think this is something that actually you do naturally. I guarantee you do this naturally. Is that what people need to do is look back in their own history and see things that happened to them that put them on a path that led them to where they are.
Sure.
And when you start to identify those moments, whether it's a thing that someone said to you, or it's a relationship you had, or it's a tragedy that happened to you, being aware of it actually helps you, because it builds your confidence. You start to understand who you are a little bit better. And there's nothing better when you're trying to be creative. But those of us who are successfully creative, I think we naturally do that because we refer back to those moments in the work that we do, or we
absolutely.
Do. So a lot of times that's kind of my advice. But what you said is fantastic. I think that because one of the things I do on this show too or try to do is I suggest. I know this is dating me too, but I talk about rewind moments.
Yeah.
And so that's my rewind moment. If you guys are watching, rewind what he just said and listen to that again, because that was really good advice. So anyway, hey, thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit about what you do. And I'm going to explore a lot of your work now going, after this. And I'll put, links to all the stuff that you're doing and go for it.
And if you would like me to send you some stuff to put into this video, I noticed on like some of the Cirque du Soleil stuff, you had the people doing their stuff, but if not, that's fine too. I appreciate it.
No, send it over to me. That would be fantastic. Anyway.
Okay.
So anyway, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
It's an honor. Thank you.
All righty. I'm going to go back to my vacation now, even though this is fun. I enjoyed having this chat with you. It really added to it. I appreciate it.
Thanks. We're on our way over to see you at the beach.
Okay. Sounds good. Talk to you later. So
all right,
thanks for the time. We'll talk to you later.
All right.